Hello, hello. My name is Bernard Oreva. Today I'll be doing a tutorial on having a label scroll across your Windows form, and this is our to do for today. We'll be adding a control to our form. We'll be adding a panel to we'll be adding controls to our form, and we'll be adjusting our panel width to accommodate our scrolling label. We'll be setting our timer speed. We'll handle our start button click event, handle our timer tick event, and handle our labels, mouse hover, and leave events. So without wasting any further time, let's jump into it. I already have my Windows Form application, Windows Form project opened here. By the way, I'm using Microsoft's Visual Studio 2012. This will also work with any other Visual Studio version you are running on your computer. And I'll be using Microsoft's C#.NET programming language to do this tutorial. If you are a Visual Basic person, you can type out my code. There are lots of resources over the internet. You can get to translate your code into Visual Basic code, and you can use it and it will work just perfect. Okay, the first thing we'll be doing according to our to-do list is adding controls to our Windows form. Let's do that without delay. We'll be needing our timer, we'll be needing a panel, we'll be needing a button, and also a label. I'm going to explain what we're going to be doing with each of these controls, so don't worry, just in case you're wondering. Let me just separate all this. And, okay, first thing I want to do is I want to increase the size of my button. This button we'll be using to start our timer to enable our label to scroll across the panel. So I'll type start here. Now this is the idea. What we want to achieve is we want our label to scroll across this panel. I'm going to have my panel here at the bottom of my Windows form. I'm going to type a sample text in this label. This would also work if you are consuming data from a database. Use the same idea, just instead of putting static text in your code behind, get your data from a database and put it into the text of your label. I'm going to be using some sample text here. I'll just type in Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and I'll duplicate this twice, so we'll have our text will be a little bit lengthy. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is I'll be stretching my panel. We want our label to scroll from the right hand side of our form to the left hand corner. If you want yours to scroll from the left to the right, just do the opposite of what I'm going to do in this tutorial. Because our panel needs room to accommodate our text, which is a little bit lengthy, to scroll from the right hand side to the left hand side, I stretch my panel this way, and I'm going to use the left arrow key of my keyboard to move it toward the left hand side of my screen. So it goes far to accommodate my scrolling label, because my scrolling label will be moving from the right hand side to the left. One thing I'm also going to do is I'm going to allow some room here, because I wouldn't want my label to just appear dramatically on my form. I want it to gradually enter my form and gradually leave my form. That's how I want it to be. And I stretched my label and moved it toward the left hand side, so that as my label goes, it has it has more room to disappear while it's scrolling. That's why I stretched it that way. If the data you'll be expecting is lengthy, and you know that, make sure your panel is long enough to accommodate it. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I'm going to place my label here. I'm choosing the location of the y-axis of my panel where I want my label to settle on, to appear on, and to be. This is our y-axis, this is our x-axis. Our label is going to be scrolling on the x-axis of our panel while it remains on the y-axis. This y-axis where I've placed my label is okay with me. I'm pretty comfortable with it. If you want it to appear somewhere else, you can place it where you want. I want my start button to also be placed at the middle of my form. This is okay for me. The next thing we want to do now is we want to work with our timer. Now let's see. We've adjusted our panel width to accommodate scrolling label. Now we need to set our timer speed. Our timer speed is measured in intervals, and by default there's 100 millisecond appearing there. 100 millisecond is a little bit too slow for my liking, so what I'm going to do is I want to work with 20 millisecond. That is fast enough for me. You should play around this to determine what speed is okay for the project you are working on. Play around it, try it out with 100 milliseconds, try it out with 50 milliseconds to get your preference. I'm also going to name my controls. Let me do that real quick. I'm going to rename my controls so they are easy for me to work with. Name this one BTN scroll. I'll name this one, as you can imagine, LBR scroll. I'll name this one PNL scroll. And I'll name this one TM scroll. Okay, what's the next thing we need to do according to our to-do list? We need to handle our start button click event. Okay, I double click my start button. I have my click event here now. What we want to do upon clicking this button is to start our timer and let our label scroll on the x-axis of our panel toward the left hand side. The idea is now our panel has a predetermined width, which is its size. We are going to be starting our label is going to begin its scroll from the width of our panel and scroll toward the left hand side. Now the idea is our panel's width right now is 1186. We will be reducing the x-axis based on the width of this our panel to make our label scroll. So our label is going to start from the end of our panel here, and that will be the x-axis. Then we'll be reducing it one by one, and making it scroll toward the left hand side. That's what makes our label scroll, by reducing its x-axis, its location on the x-axis. So let's go there now. What we want to do is, when we click on our button, we want to start our timer. I name my timer TM scroll. I'm going to do TM scroll.start. But there are possibilities that when we click our button, our timer has already started and our label is already scrolling. So we just want it to continue to scroll. If the timer has already started and our label is already scrolling and you click that button, we want it to stop scrolling. And if it hasn't started scrolling, we want it to start scrolling. So with that, we're going to put an if statement here, checking if our timer has started. And to do that, we'll just do our timer name.enabled. This returns a Boolean value, so it checks if our timer is already enabled, then we want it to stop. But if it hasn't, then we want it to start. Okay. If it's already enabled, then we want it to stop. And when it's enabled, it means our timer has started. And when our timer starts, we want our btn text to also display. We want it to also display start. Then our else statement, if it stopped, we want it to start when we click that button, and we want the text to be stopped. Now we are done with our buttons click event. The next thing we need to do now is to handle our timer tick event. To handle that, we come here and we double click on our timer control. It brings us here to our timer tick event handler. What we want to do here first of all is we want to check if our label has gotten to the end of its x-axis. So check our label's location dot x. If it's equal to 0, that means it has gotten to its end. We want it to start all over again. It should begin from the width of the panel and scroll over all over again. So to make it scroll now, what we'll do is we'll just copy this one. Yeah. The location should be now. This point method requires two arguments. The first argument is the x-axis of where you want your LBL scroll to be, the x-axis, and the second argument is the y-axis. Now, as I mentioned earlier, our x-axis is going to be our panel's width, and our y-axis is going to be where our label is already. I like where it is already, so I'm going to maintain that. If you do not want that for what you're working on, then change it to what you want it to be, to suit the project you're working on. So I'll maintain my y-axis. There's one more thing we need to do. We want our label to scroll each time our timer ticks, and to make it scroll, we have to be reducing the y-axis of our location of our LBL scroll location by 1. To do that, I'm going to create a global variable here, which I'm going to global integer variable here, which I'm going to name x counter. That's what's going to hold my count for me, and I'm initializing it to 0. I'm making it global because we will be using it to work with our timer tick event handler and also our labels, mouse hover, and mouse leave event handlers. So what I want to do now is we want this to be reduced by whatever we have in our counter variable. Then afterwards, we want to increase our counter's value by 1. Now there is an else statement here, because if our label hasn't scrolled to the end of our panel, which will make it appear at the 0 part of its x-axis, we want it to continue scrolling. To make it continue scrolling, what we just need to do is to copy this, and it continues. One more thing I need to point out is when it has gotten to the end of the panel, we want it to start all over again. To achieve that, we need to reinitialize our counter variable to 0. So it starts reducing from 0 again, making the label begin from the width of our panel once again. That's what makes it scroll all over again. So I think we are done now with our timer stick event. What's the next thing we need to do? Okay, before we handle the mouse events, we need to run our application and see how it appears and see if it even works. If you notice, when we started this application, our label is already appearing. It doesn't look nice, it doesn't look professional. What we want it to do is when our form runs, we want it not to show. So to do that, we go to the load event of our form and we change the location. We make the location of our scrolling label to be at the width of our panel, so it doesn't appear. Now let's run it again, and when we run it, it doesn't appear. Now when we click our start button, let's watch. Our label appears and starts scrolling from the right hand side to the left hand side of our screen. And if you noticed, I didn't give our panel any borders, so you won't even know that it's scrolling inside the panel. If you want it to be visible that it's scrolling inside the panel, then give borders to your panel, or do whatever designs you want to do there. But I prefer mine this way for this tutorial. We can equally stop our scrolling label by clicking the button. We can start it all over again. We can stop it and start it all over again. And let's watch as it goes over and starts scrolling from the beginning again once it gets to the end of our panel. It has gotten to the end and it has continued scrolling again from the beginning. Okay, the next thing we want to do is, in an actual application, you wouldn't have a start and stop button, obviously, but you might have a need to want to hover on your text, your scrolling label, to read something that is passing by and let it go so that it continues scrolling. To achieve that, we need to handle our labels mouse hover and mouse leave events. To do that, we come over here, come to our label, our scrolling label, come to its properties, we come to its events, we check for our mouse hover and mouse leave event handlers. We double click on our mouse hover event handler, that's the one we're going to be working with first. Now when we hover on our label, we want our timer to stop, thereby making our scrolling label stop scrolling. To do that, we call our timer and call the stop. Now we stop our timer when we hover on it, and when we take our mouse cursor off, we want it to continue scrolling. To achieve that also, we look for our mouse leave event and we just copy. Okay, let me type it out. Call our timer dot start. Okay, now to spice it up a little bit, when we stop our timer, obviously we want our button's text to also display start, and when it stops, when it stops, we want our button's text to display. When it starts, we want our button text to display stop. Okay, let's test it out and see what happens. We've started our scrolling label. Let's watch. Now our label is scrolling. When we hover on it, it stops, and our button shows display start. When we take our mouse cursor off, it continues scrolling and our button shows stop. It stops, it starts. We can stop it with our button. We can start it with our button. We can stop it with our button, hover on it, take our cursor off, and it starts also. Alright, thank you so much for watching this tutorial. You can subscribe to my channel, or if you have challenges with any project you're working on you want me to assist you with, you can send me an email at my email address, which is bernard_fegor@yahoo.com, and I would respond to your email. If you also want me to do a particular tutorial on a subject that interests you, let me know and I'll do it and update you once I have that video uploaded on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching and have a nice day. Bye bye.